This is the Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it. I'm Callan Hoffman, and joining us on the podcast today is Grank Kluzak. Super excited for our podcast friends to meet Grant because he has an extensive background. I know 20 plus years in the Navy, all sorts of things with data science, AI, cybersecurity, and he's in the working group with us here at the Data Science Alliance. You've been a big part of DSA for a while, which we really appreciate, and now you've let us bring you on the podcast, so we appreciate it. Before we get started, welcome to the pod. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Callan. Doing great.
Yeah.
Glad to finally be able to do a
I
podcast
know.
with you. We've only been trying this, for a year and a half,
A
probably?
bit, yeah. Grant is so involved. You've been a guest speaker with us, a mentor to students through DSA, and we're finally doing the podcast. So you have an interesting background, so much experience in different sectors that I'm really excited for our podcast listeners to hear about. To get started, maybe could you just tell us a little more about the path you took? Maybe, kind of a high level summary of what was your journey
Sure.
to where you are now and what kind of, sparked your interest in all this?
So as you mentioned, I did, over 20 years in uniform. I was in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. And ironically, that gives me exposure to various lines of business type work, maintenance, operations, logistics, even IT to a degree. So I've been dabbling in those fields during that time in uniform, solving problems, delivering solutions. Then when I transitioned out and I became a government civilian, basically driving that amphibious ship readiness and maintenance for the entire Pacific Fleet. It became hey, my teams would ask me, can you help solve problems? How do we connect these dots better, and how do we be more efficient? And that's where the whole data integration problem solving piece started coming together. Fast forward, got an opportunity to go do an internship type rotational opportunity at Navor that was doing their data science training program, because they were, as the Navy's Information Warfare Systems Command, they felt they needed to, I want to say educate, but it's really upskill the workforce to get them data savvy, and then even get them to the point where they were starting to think about data driven and how to use data analytics. So we started doing that. COVID hit, gave us a neat chance to pivot and go from an in classroom training program to a purely online remote based training program, which amazingly allows you to scale rapidly because you're not constrained by a classroom size anymore. But scaling when you get 50 plus people in an online course becomes a challenge as well. So learning to adapt through that, deliver the feedback from the students. That opportunity led to a job opening for their data director, which is the equivalent of a chief data officer for that organization. Interviewed, got hired for that job, and as soon as I was in the role in that, I was asked to go help support Don CIO, the Chief Information Officer for the Department of the Navy, with doing some data governance, data stewardship work across the entirety of the Navy, as well as a kind of collateral. So these opportunities have just sort of been building, and it's really kind of driven me to this point where I've got a very cross-functional look at how I approach data analytics, AI, the ethics, and the application of the data as well.
When you first went into the Navy, did you think you would kind of be where you are now and working so much with the data side of things?
Not at all. And I think that's, it's funny because you mentioned the mentoring we've done with the interns here. That's one of those feedbacks that I kind of help try to inspire in folks going through college and coming out is like, hey, look, one, your degree is just that. It's a degree. What you make of it, those experiences you build. I mean, literally, as I was driving in today, I was having a mentoring session with a colleague who's been presented an opportunity, but she's at a point in her career where she's got some other things going on. So I was helping her work through that a little bit personally. Of, yeah, that might help you resume wise, but is that really where you want to be, and are you going to be able to give it your all? So the answer is be diverse, and look for look for different opportunities in different places.
Never know where your path might go.
You never know.
Yeah. Well, with so much experience and kind of in different sectors and different organizations, how have you seen the use of data and, AI coming in? How have you seen the use and maybe conversations around those tools grow and kind of evolve over the years?
It's amazing. It's kind of like the buzz around AI. And, I take that journey back 5, 10 years. And back then it was the buzz around data and just getting to data analytics, being able to visualize the data. One of the challenges we've had in the Department of Defense is really everything's legacy siloed. Uh, so to bring the data out of those silos, get it together so that you can see the cross-functional value in the bigger picture has been a challenge. Then there's the AI applications now that are just absolutely game changing from an ability to deliver at speed and pace. You know, we've gone from days when you had to have a data scientist per se write code or go look up code, because again, you don't know every nuance of a specific language. So they'd go online, um, do some research to investigate a better way to write a segment of the code or to do a function. Now you can ask an AI agent in your software and it gives you that feedback immediately. Still requires a human in the loop to integrate it, make sure it actually works right, but it solves and eliminates some of those steps of that having to go out, look it up.
What is it like to look back, on, like we said, you've been in your career path for 20 plus years, the Navy and everything. What is it like to look back on maybe when you first started where we were at, especially within the defense sector with this type of technology compared to where it's all headed now?
Um, so one of my stories that I like to joke about with data scientists or other technologists is in college I used to communicate with the mainframe from a dumb terminal, green text on a black screen, via a dial-up acoustically coupled modem. And then, back to the Navy. My first experience with computers in the Navy was here's your 8-inch floppy disk. They wanted me to rewrite a shipboard policy using WordPerfect that we were storing it on 8-inch floppy disks. So we've gone from those kinds of days to now where everything's networked. Even the ships today have full-time connectivity back and forth with folks on the beach. They're doing real-time chat, um, and that amount of data, and that's one of the challenges we face, is unlike traditional internet where you've got gigabit and you've got fiber to the house or to the office. We often have to figure out how do we reduce that data. And so there's data that it's how do I reduce the data, how do I send the relevant data, but not impact the ability to do analytics or have enough data to do, say, AI based work on it.
Has there ever been a time where you really saw your team have to adjust to some of those changes, the kind of technological innovations?
So fun story. Um, was driving a project called Hermes where we've got Navy message traffic, which, if you think about the old school movies you've seen with the teletypes and how people communicate, with the State Department and different branches of the military, we still do that today. The teletypes are gone, but that very textual method of communication still exists. Very much point to point, and there wasn't a central place where anybody was collecting that data. We figured out a way to take that data out of that system, connect it, and provide it into our cloud enterprise data platform. Um, from there, we were able to do natural language processing on it. We could parse out and eliminate PII and cleanly tag that. We were taking that very textual data and turning it into tabular data. As the volume grew, we were at a point where when I left that role, we were well over 10 million of those data sets, those messages. Um, the guys were struggling a little bit because some of our processing time, if we wanted to go back and relook at our batches, and they're like, "Hey, wait a second, we're using a cloud-based platform. We think we can use PySpark to process faster." And most data scientists learn in Anaconda on a laptop. When you go to the power of the cloud, you have that ability to do parallel processing with Spark. All it took was changing from using pandas in their Python code to using PySpark, and we drove, I think it was almost 1,000% improvement in
Wow.
process. And it was one of those lessons learned of what you were taught in college and the way you learned to do your work versus the application of that very powerful cloud tool. Put those two together and it became a magical,
Wow.
really, solution for us.
1,000%.
It was
That's a big
pretty
number.
amazing. I mean, it was processing times of upwards to an hour down into less than 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good lesson there on being flexible and kind of adaptive with the times.
Well, and it saves on compute cost, and those are the kinds of things. Again, it goes back to the be willing to try something new, be willing to challenge a position. And the guys came to me and said, "Hey, we think we can, blah blah blah," and I said, like, "Go for it. What have we got to lose?" A couple of hours worth of labor time for them to do an experiment. The experiment proved out, and then we had to start educating others of, hey, if you're using this platform, here's a way to do things better, faster.
hmm Was there ever a time where you saw data and or AI really affect decision making, maybe especially in the Navy? Could you talk about how it kind of informs decision making?
So from that Navy side, the work we were doing to support the CIO's office, um, one of the things I was in charge of the enterprise operations management domain, which is what we call IT data about IT things. Included the budget, the programmatic tracking of all of the systems we were buying. Um, nobody had probably 25 different sources we had to put together. It had never been done before. So they didn't have a way to actually look at budget versus execution other than at the end of the fiscal year. Um, Collaboration with some smart folks, we figured out how to take our Navy general ledger system and actually look at those individual purchases on a weekly and monthly basis, categorize those to know what we were buying, who was buying it, tied some of those systems together, found the right joins. We were able to visualize that and start showing that $11 billion Navy IT portfolio to leadership. And they started using that to then rationalize where they were spending and making strategic decisions. Looking at places where you're paying for duplicate capability, looking for, I'm buying a certain software package, but I'm buying it down echelon 35 times. Well, if we pull that together and buy it once, we could probably get a better negotiated price for it. So those insights and being able to see that actual data into a visualization that led to data-driven decision making was actually like probably one of the most rewarding parts of my career.
Wow. Yeah, really it sounds like it made a big difference in just budgeting, decision making, team strategy, everything really.
It was fun, and I mean, we were doing that with, I was managing that team remotely, and it was kind of really fun and empowering to be able to iterate with those teams, and we brought in collective stakeholders as well to help work with us. I mean, none of these were single, take a team, put them in a closet, and build a solution. Usually, it involved building a community and a coalition first to go out and tackle some of those problems.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to AI within all of that, do you feel like that was kind of an adjustment of its own in a way?
So the government, in my opinion, is still struggling with adopting AI. There's I want to call it almost an inverse risk um, perspective with it, where they're deathly afraid of it, and we've got to change that somehow. Because there are places where AI, as I talked about with like the code helpers and stuff, there's places where we can use that internally. We can internalize an LLM. You've got the ability to take like an OpenAI or a Claude or a Mistral model these days, bring it into your environment, define those boundaries, and allow people to work with it. But we're still afraid to do that because we're afraid it might hallucinate. My question is, if it hallucinates and it's in my internal employees, is that bad? I need to grow and elevate that employee acceptance and adoption of AI.
Mm,
The work we were doing at CISA was specifically to be able to large volumes, petabytes of data a day. And the goal was be able to build the data backend so that we could do the joins, so that we could turn AI loose on that data set internally in a safe way, so that you could start helping the analysts find those needles in a haystack, because those needles are constantly changing too in size and perspective. And that's where we've got to get to really with data and AI. But it's in all in a very governed fashion.
Mm. Like we've kind of mentioned, a lot of DSA, whether it's our community or interns, are students.
Mhm.
Do you have maybe advice, for people who are maybe just getting into the industry? Do you think there's a mindset or certain steps that newer people to the workforce can take to kind of help that process?
So number one, you got to be curious. Um, you know, I joke I approach life now kind of as a cold case detective. Everything's a why is that? What haven't we looked at? Is there a different angle? Is it a different perspective? Um, so, I think that's don't take anything for granted. Um, and then build diversity into your background. You know, when you look at hiring these days, I would rather take some of my best data scientists didn't start as data scientists, believe it or not. Biomechanical engineers. There's a person that I trust as a technologist and a data driven, data informed kind of strategist. Her background's in anthropology.
Wow.
So, when we talk about diversity of the workforce, it's really that diversity of thought and perspective, that ability for people to bring in different kind of understandings and approaches to things that allow us to craft the product that delivers meaningfully for the customer. And it allows a team to be able to quickly bond with a customer if you've got some diversity. Taking a data scientist who's only done financial work their entire career, and then you throw them into a human capital kind of thing where I'm trying to figure out how do I optimize recruiting and whatnot. Um, the core problem's the same. It's still an optimization problem, but the data sets are different. And if that person has never had experience outside of the financial world, they don't understand the true impact behind applicants and recruits and the training and the onboarding and all of those aspects that would go with the HR side. So that diversity really helps, I think. And that's why I don't, the other thing is we don't do anything solo. Everything's team based,
Mhm.
because it brings that opinion perspective, and you've got to build a willingness to challenge. I think that's the other part to a lot of the young folks is learn how to respectively kind of push back
Mm.
and express your opinion. You may be young, you may be inexperienced, but you probably have a perspective that the rest of the team may be going down a groupthink path.
Not afraid to speak up.
Not afraid to speak up
Hmm.
respectfully.
Respectfully, professionally.
Yes.
Has there ever been a time where, like we said, there's lots of learning and growing to still be done, but has there been a time throughout your career where you were kind of like, wow, the power of data or AI or both, where you really saw the impact on work that was able to get done?
Um, the impact on work, yeah. I mean, one of the things we did at Navor, and this is kind of unique too, is it's also look for opportunities to leverage what you already have at hand. The Department of the Navy bought Office 365 for everyone in the Department of the Navy. And they bought a pretty powerful license set that included Power BI. We had access to the full Power Platform capabilities, so you could use Power Apps, Power Automate. And with the Power Platform, we had the back end side of a Dataverse, which is a relational database. And this was all Microsoft sells it as low code, no code. We've learned it really takes some pro code developers to work with it, but the average user could build their way through some very simple routines. From a workflow automation, from a problem solving, when you start doing cross functional organizational, at Navor, we built a facilities ticketing system using just the Microsoft products. We started building a whole human capital suite of tools for in-house management of billet management, et cetera, that was all done using existing licensing and existing tooling. Maybe introduced a few of those pro code developers to do some help, but those folks were helping multiple teams. So that was where we were able to really leverage technology. And the killer there is once you start this kind of snowball rolling downhill, the number of people coming to you with use cases going, "Hey, can you help me with this?" just grew exponentially. And I think that's the challenge is there's plenty of opportunity. It's allowing the workforce to go after it and solve some of those solutions themselves.
Could you tell us a little more about some of your more recent work? I know that you were working with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I think you said CISA is another way to refer to
CISA is
it.
the way we refer to
Yeah,
that.
you've mentioned it a little bit, but could you tell us a little more details about that?
Yeah. So I was working specifically in the cybersecurity division. And again, we were one of the reasons that I was recruited in to go work at CISA was to help them take their cyber analytics data system, CADS, and really do that data integration and fusion to allow for the ability to start leveraging AI to understand, find malware, find intrusions as they're happening. How do we close those gaps? How do I take a intrusion that you find happening over here, quickly look at the vulnerabilities of other systems and notify those system owners, hey, there's an ongoing problem here. We suggest you patch this today. That's part of what we were working on at CISA is really driving that sort of transformation. Much of that program and much of the data has been legacy. There were pieces and parts and systems that were still doing command line interface analytics. And I'm just like, there's a better way to do this than folks typing in and doing command line work. So that was the intent. And that was a lot of what we were doing. And we actually, before I left CISA, we had some good success. We did a 90-day pilot on taking one of the data sets in, doing normalization, transforming it, fully cataloging it, and then making that data set even available to other users. 90 days end-to-end data ingest through visualizations, and it was a smashing success. And kind of like I mentioned with the Navware work, as we were doing that 90-day pilot, the other users across the rest of the organization were like, hey, we want to get in on that. We want to do this. We've got this data set we want to bring. And it's fun when you're working projects like that because you quickly have to get into a prioritization process.
Hmm.
And you literally start applying business value modeling to it and go, where do we get the most value organizationally from which data sets? How do they depend on each other? Because you'd have to look at not just the data set, but the use case. Tie those two together and go, well, these folks collectively need these three data sets, and their project relies on just their own. So I had to prioritize some of that. Really a fun challenge, but it's one of those where it was probably again another very rewarding kind of civil servant job because you're modernizing something that's absolutely critical to our national security.
Definitely. Have you seen the need for that type of thing grow over the years?
We have, one of the other things out of that is you see you start understanding the scale of cyber incidents that don't go reported, the ransomware attacks, the that happen against small businesses, small government agencies, et cetera, that are unreported, and you really start understanding the volume and the impact of the challenge. Um, and I think this is one of those where I think a lot of us take cybersecurity for in the reliability of the internet for granted. And you think about it, banking, the way you get paid, the ability to buy groceries, to put gas in your car or charge your car, etc. All of those daily things in life rely on the internet and cybersecurity. So it was really an impactful, profound time to be able to get after some of those kind of core problems that keep all of us safe and keep, you know, the economic engine of America functioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems to be more and more of a hot topic these days, the security, safety concerns with tech, especially when it comes to AI growing and things like that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I saw God, was it a YouTube video, all AI generated. It looked like actual people and somebody conducting a street-based interview, and it was 100% AI generated.
Wow.
So, and it kind of goes back to the diversity of thought and, just thinking through safety, social media, which, in a lot of ways ties back to our whole responsible data thing. There's, if you want, we could talk a little bit about like AI ethics.
Yeah,
Um,
that was my next question. So
okay, so we
it's
can go
perfect.
there. There we go. Um, there's a we have to get to the point where we have users that are educated enough that they're part of that trust model.
Hmm.
AI ethics, AI trust cannot be just governed by paper and doctrine. One, because how do you define AI? There's such a broad swath of capabilities in the AI space today
Hmm.
that you can't pass one magic legislative governance type protective rule for AI. Part of that is we have to train and educate the users, kind of like we've had to do with social media.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, you talk to, and I'll say the younger generation, you know, teenagers into their 20s and 30s, openly understand where things are getting driven and how somebody's trying to influence through social media. I think the older generations have a harder time with that because of the way people grew up thinking. I think they see social media as news.
Hmm.
So how do we educate folks on AI ethics, the fact that Chat GPT, Claude, Gemini could be giving you erroneous information? Goes back to the curiosity.
Hmm. Hmm.
Do some double checking. If something seems slightly off, ask the AI to prove where it got its sources. Um, you know, I a good analogy I use is the navigation systems. Back when I started driving, well, actually, while I was driving, they invented those, dash-mounted navigation things from Garmin,
Hmm.
TomTom, etc. Um, Nobody trusted those because they'd drive you through lakes, they'd take you through dead-end roads, they'd put you the wrong way on a one-way street, etc. It was horrible. Or you'd wind up doing, you must make a U-turn and go back. So the user community grew into that where there was a level of skepticism, but it still helped you navigate. Fast forward to today, built-in navigation systems in cars, what we've got in our phones. And do people think twice about that? The
Everyone trusts it blindly, I
the,
think
the
now.
technology's advanced, and we've gotten to that point where user trust is at a point where generally you'll do a quick check at the route and you'll go, yep, that looks right. Boom, and you're off and running.
Hmm.
Um, that's part of that user growth with the technology growth. You can't have both. Everything has to be user centered.
Hmm.
Um, AI and chatbots. I've got a friend who's developing um, a framework that works within an LLM to do AI as a team. Basically, you create team personas and an orchestration layer inside of an LLM. So when you ask a question, you actually ask the team to do a roundtable analytic
Hmm.
to give you an answer back. So you're not just getting theoretically one perspective, you're getting that diverse perspective back
Hmm.
in a more refined answer. Um, we think that's kind of game changing in the way to apply those LLMs because you can have a more interactive conversation with it. And we've learned we even build in a contrarian now into that roundtable discussion to challenge the other persona's views. Um, so you can build this, but people have to think and be creative of how we use and apply the AI.
Hmm. It almost sounds like, when it comes to AI ethics and using it responsibly and growing with it, it's on the users too. I think sometimes people think it's all on the tech people, the creators, but it's kind of like the users need to kind of be thinking as well.
Well, I've seen this across various domains in the public space and even in the private space, where you've got data that's designed and collected for one purpose. And this is the challenge with data aggregation to drive some of the value output. I want cross-functional data, but the reason certain data sets were collected in those, and there's biases built into them that are not necessarily um, communicated. Uh, and so it's how do you explain to people that you always have to do a little bit of trust but verify as you even start integrating cross-functional data, which leads back to that communication piece. Let's talk to the users over here and understand how they trust and use that daily. This other group wants to use that data. Well, how do you want to use the data? And have that allow, almost force that conversation between those two user groups who are experts in what they're trying to do. And then our job is just to sort of connect those dots and make sure it meets the bound.
When it comes to policy and regulation, legislation, is there a certain direction you hope to see that go when it comes to AI?
So first off is we've got to stop thinking of AI as a singularity, a singular thing. Um, there's a broad spectrum of AI that gets applied, and you can look at it from natural language processing through traditional, you know, math-based ML to the very kind of, today textual large language model world. AI is not just any one of those, it's that full spectrum. So you can't govern that with one magical solution. And that's, when people ask me the question, usually my first one is, well, how do you define AI? And then I think secondly is how do we get away from paper-based governance and policy? Um, you know, eh, there's there's discussion on doing policy as code so that you can actually have segments that are, chunked like data that you can use that then apply to downstream execution of that governance. Give you an example. Think of something like the tax code. I think we've all seen the pictures of, the published tax codes, like 3 inches thick of printed 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. How do we turn that into something that can actually be automated and analyzed quickly? So that when you're sitting at home doing TurboTax, you can ask a question and get an answer against the tax code like that, and maybe with two and three different perspectives. Um, that's where we've got to get to. And I think that's a cultural change that really is driven through government, through the way we interact, in our personal lives and everything. I mean, you know, you buy a house today, they still make you wet sign a stack of paperwork to buy it to close a mortgage. But yet, I can use DocuSign to do so many other things in the world. Why have we not adopted that ability to do DocuSign where I don't have to kill trees and print paper? So I think those are parts of, this is big cultural tough challenges to get after.
Yeah, kind of adjusting to the times in a way, making it accessible.
It is. I mean, I think, human nature is probably we're all resistant to change. And I think that's one of those areas where just because it worked in the 1960s doesn't mean it necessarily is the right way to go about doing things here in 2025.
Hmm. Kind of keeping that in mind, how things are constantly changing.
Mhm.
Do you have advice for students? I know you mentioned curiosity earlier. Is there any advice you would give students or people early in their careers when it comes to entering the workforce, especially in this industry, and kind of staying adaptive?
Uh, two kind of veins there. The first is, you know, learn to be a self learner and learn to be a lifelong learner. Technology is changing, especially in the software driven, application facing kind of space, about every 6 months. And to keep pace with that, you've got to literally be following, online journal articles and blogs, and you've got to kind of be following the latest trends and doing some deep diving and going and taking, a YouTube or a LinkedIn learning course or something like that to just kind of fill something out. Um, I think the second piece is build diversity into your own background. Um, and by that, it could be tying your hobbies into your work. Give you an example. Um, I'm an amateur genealogist, and I'm also, I'd call it, well, I do high performance driving with street cars on a racetrack. And both of those have become very data driven kind of um, skills. We use data as feedback to see where we enter, the velocity we're using to enter corners and leave corners on a racetrack, how hard we're decelerating, how many lateral G's are on the car. And we're doing this at the amateur level. That's greatly improved my driving ability because when you can see when you go around a corner and you see this seesaw output of those lateral G's changing in and out, that's lost momentum. And when you learn to drive it smoothly and you see that constant load of that lateral G, amazingly your track time's better. So there's a very much data driven reward. Same thing, the genealogy piece, it kind of makes me think back to, I mean, my undergraduate degree is in political science. When I did political science, we lived in the library and perused census books that look like tax code. Um, Nowadays, if you're a political scientist, I guarantee you've got a minor in computer science. It's all online, it's all data driven, it's using data to tell a story to drive an outcome. So build that build that diversity in your portfolio because if I'm hiring, I'm looking for somebody who isn't just a one-trick pony. I want a shape-shifting unicorn.
We all strive to be shape-shifting unicorns. Put that on my resume.
Maybe I should coin that, right?
That could be a thing, a course that you could teach.
How to,
Next data
how to be
discourse
a
of it.
shape-shifting unicorn. Yeah.
That's fantastic advice. Well, as we, just keep an eye, like you said, it feels like every 6 months there's something new, if even shorter within that time.
Yeah.
Are there any trends or innovations to kind of end on a positive note? Anything you feel really optimistic or excited about that you're seeing?
Um, yeah, I mean, like a kind of back to the large language model piece. I think you're just starting to see where it's impacting people's ability to do things. Um, the When you learn how to use them, it's truly amazing what you can do in your workflows from an editing, from a changing perspective. Do I want to take a document and have it written at an executive level, or do I want to dumb it down and make it more at a high school level? Those abilities to do that within minutes are game changing, and I think that for me is kind of the encouraging piece. It leads to that struggle and challenge of is AI going to put people out of work? Um, I I'm kind of this is funny. I'm a little bit on the pessimistic side, and this is one of those where I'm optimistic. If people are willing to adapt, they're not going to be put out of work because there's still going to be people that need to infer, to ask the questions. That goes back to that curiosity piece, right? Somebody's got to write the prompts and do the inputs into the LLMs to drive the output. There has to be a human machine teaming there. And I think that's the answer is the mundane, boring, routine jobs. I mean, it's kind of like the old days of an assembly line. Robots have put a lot of that out of work. Adapt, figure out, how do you become the person who's programming the robot? How do you become the person who's interfacing, working, customizing that AI to be better, smarter, faster for the users? So it's funny that I'm that positive that it's going to change the workforce. I don't think it's necessarily going to put people out of work.
It's a good perspective to have because that is, of course, a big discussion topic within AI, the effect it'll have on people's jobs. That's a positive outlook for sure.
I mean, I like to think that this is one of those where the futurists can't predict what that next step looks like. I mean, I don't think, you think back 3 years, I don't think anybody really predicted where this shift was going to happen with the LLM world.
Mhm.
And now, I mean, it's pretty pervasive everywhere. I mean, you can't find a SaaS software offering that doesn't have AI agents built into it to help you do things better, faster, stronger.
Mhm. Can't escape it.
Well, and it sort of snuck in too, though. I mean, there were basics of AI, spam filters and email. Um, you know, how many users noticed when cell phones started providing predictive prompts for texting?
Mm.
And now if you use Google or Microsoft, it's giving you predictive text as you're typing your documents or your emails. Um, I think that's part of this piece too. Is the world's changing around us, and the text being implemented based on user feedback that the average user is probably not even realizing it's changing.
That's a good point. There's little things slipped in there that we probably didn't even think about.
Well, and that's where it goes back to the be curious,
Yeah.
elevate yourself, and try to get a little bit ahead of that power curve.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. Great advice today, especially shape-shifting unicorns. That's probably my
Shape shifting
favorite
unicorn.
thing so far.
I'm gonna have to
But
go back and have an AI generated
I
logo
know,
for that
right?
name.
Yeah, that'll be like the next podcast, a sub podcast or something. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Really great advice, touched on a lot of things that were really insightful. So we appreciate it. Grant is a part of our Data Discourse event series soon. So if you're in San Diego or want to come to San Diego and hear more from Grant, go to datasciencealliance.org to see it. But otherwise, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll have you on future episodes. But for now,
Thanks,
we
Gal.
appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with a friend. And don't forget, the Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we would really appreciate your support. You can do a donation, become a member, volunteer with us, or attend an event. We have lots going on all the time here in San Diego, California. Even if you don't live here, though, you can still get involved. So go to our website, datasciencealliance.org. Otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.